This is Pospo and BRAINCAST for Maudsley Learning. In fact, the last BRAINCAST of this academic year. Time flies, right? So last week, we were joined by Dr. Emmett Roberts and talked about the influence of culture on alcohol use, the clear links between deprivation and substance use disorders, as well as the detrimental impact funding cuts brought to all addiction services. This week, true to the saying, save the best for last, we're going deep into the world of chords, scales, progressions, and improvisation. The world of music. Yes, that thing captured by your auditory cortex, while the frontal regions of your brain process the structure, and the cerebellum, the back of your brain, the rhythm and the meter, giving a boost of dopamine through your nucleus accumbens, resulting in you saying, wow, that's a nice tune. Play it again, Sam. That thing, music. But music is not just that, right? Music is so much more than sound. And who better to talk about it than a musician? With lungs larger than life and energy on stage that could power a whole city, it has broken down the stereotypes of what to expect from jazz. If you heard any music by Sons of Kemet, A Comet is Coming, or Shabaka and the Ancestors, well, you've listened to the man. The Mercury Prize nominee, Shabaka Hutchings. Welcome.
Hello.
I mean, it's the time that I actually have to clap and all that, and you hear the crowd, Shabaka, welcome to BRAINCAST. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
Shabaka, people link music to sound. So we will start the other way around. We'll start with silence. In psychotherapy, silence is a really important aspect of the therapeutic process. We use silence for observation, self-exploration, while it also facilitates an interpersonal space where both therapist and patient can communicate. Now, interestingly, silence in psychotherapy doesn't mean inner silence, right? Actually, William Burroughs once said that the word is a parasite that invades and damages the central nervous system, and modern man has lost the option of silence. Try to achieve even 10 seconds of inner silence, and you will encounter a resisting organism that forces you to talk. And that organism, William Burroughs said, is the word. So how important is silence in music?
Well, there's a couple of strands of this, and actually it's very fascinating because recently I've been trying to experiment in life in general of having thoughts in my head in the house and going through certain processes, and then having no communication with the outside world. So putting my shades on, putting my headphones on with nothing in it, and not catching any eyes throughout my whole day, not being infiltrated by anything, and only putting my gaze of vision on what I want. So I might look at things, but I don't allow anything to come in. In some sense, I think that is important because there's lots of things that put you off of your field of vision. And at some stages, which I think the one that I'm at, I need to really be consistent in my flow of thoughts. But there's another interesting thing, which is John Cades did a lot of experiments about silence. One in which he went into is it called an anatomical chamber? A chamber where technically you can't hear any sound, and he was able to hear the vibration of his own body. And he was saying that was interesting in that there is no silence. Silence is an illusion in terms of pure scientific silence. What that means is that what we see as silence is a matter of perspective, that we're not perceiving we're deciding to not perceive certain sounds that are already there. So I think it's important to narrow our field of vision, our oral field of vision sometimes, so that we're just not getting a cacophony that we can't control into us. And I think that's actually what music is, in a sense. It's allowing us to focus our oral sensibility so that the kind of war and the kind of chaos in the world doesn't knock us off our equilibrium.
Now, the function of music is multifaceted, from pure fun to dance to even distract us from our troubles, but also to define our social identity. Written back in the 50s assumed that music preferences, or what you choose to listen to, it reflects your unconscious motives and urges and desires, while the contemporary view is that people, they seek musical environments that reinforce and reflect their personalities, their attitudes, their emotions. These all, of course, are relevant to the receivers of music, the listeners, and how we choose what to listen to. But what about the creators? What about the musicians? So how do you choose your musical genre? You didn't wake up one day and said, I want to play jazz, right?
No, and actually, you know, genre like silence is an illusion, and it's functional. It makes sense in terms of having to commodify a product and sell it, and that's the industry that we are in. But in terms of an artist, it's really unhelpful to think in terms of genre, and the earliest that you can get out of that type of thinking, for me, the better. I think that's actually crucial to why I've become the type of musician that I have ended up being. And I never believed in the genres. At the point in which I believed in genres, I thought I didn't like jazz because jazz was supposed to be a certain thing. It was supposed to be a rich, paradoxically white music. You know, when you're a teenager and you only associate jazz clubs with kind of graying beards and, you know, kind of guys going, this is interesting, but you can't appreciate it because you're not good enough. You know, it's not something that feels inclusive. Whereas when you get away from the preconceived stigmas around the music and what the labels are supposed to imply, music becomes a completely different thing. And actually, now I just view music as actually how an African source of musical inspiration has manifested itself over lots of different continents through lots of different races and types of people and societies. I see everything as coming from Africa, you know, so how we can actually, how the differences in the manifestation of certain types of fundamental music can be shown. That's the only thing that matters to me at the moment.
You know, Miles Orville, the author of the book, The Real Thing, it was called The Real Thing, Imitation of Authenticity in American Culture. So he once said that the concept of authenticity begins in any society when the possibility of fraud arrives. So how many years does it take to find your own voice and not feel a fraud, that you feel like you're imitating someone else?
It takes ages, you know, like for me, like there's a difference between me answering the question in a hypothetical way and a personal way. Personally, I think that, you know, and this actually kind of sounds a bit a bit cliched, but when I turned about 30, I stopped feeling like I was trying to chase after something. Like I was trying to chase after an image of a musician, which I would never achieve. I started to just relax and actually just enjoy the making of music. And that's when I stopped feeling in any way like I was a fraud. It kind of lined up with me actually not regarding America and the American ideals and aesthetics within music as the pinnacle of all music. You know, I think that, you know, and that manifests itself, not manifests, it ricochets off European culture in general in the way that it can often posit itself in a hierarchical way to other musics and other ways of considering music. So for me, I stopped feeling like a fraud when I stopped thinking that European/American forms of music were necessarily better than others, you know. So then it gave me a freedom to actually just explore lots of different types of ways of making music, ways of seeing music, and everything became a lot more easy and fun and wholesome, actually.
You know, there are different schools of thought about, you know, the whole creative process of how you create music. So David Byrne of the Talking Heads once commented that people in general think that, you know, that the musician lived something and that this is how you write music. But in fact, he said, we don't make music. It's music that makes us. And then on the other hand, so Albert Ayler, explaining how he pushed jazz forward and created his unique sound, he said that I have lived more than I can express in bebop terms. So where does the truth lie?
Well, first you need to look at exactly what Albert Ayler meant by that phrase. Bebop is a way of considering music in a harmonic sense. It's a way of considering a harmonic matrix that you can actually expand almost infinitely to express a musical vision. And Albert Ayler is saying, despite the complexity and the work that's needed to achieve mastery within that matrix, it doesn't satisfy the life that he's led. And I don't think that that's necessarily different from what David Byrne is saying, because it's not possible to separate the lived life from the musical expression, because you're expressing a life that's lived. Even David Byrne making that statement is a reflection of his life until that point. You know, him seeing his music making in that way is almost invalidating his point, because his point is, you know, his point is that he lived a life that's made him consider the act of making music in that way. You know, so I think they're all talking about the same thing, which is, you know, you cannot be two beings. You are one person, despite what people might say. You are one entity. You know, spirit and intellectualism and physicality, everything is one unit. And music is maybe a way of certain elements of that music, of that unit, showing themselves more prominently than others, but it is still the same unit. So the life lived is going to be the music that's reflected.
So you spend a whole lifetime, and you know, you learn music, you find your identity in music, and you create the music that you find that's amazing. And then people, they don't like it. So rejection. How do you deal with this?
I found the easiest way for me to deal with rejection is having a massive sense of self-confidence and what people might describe as ego, because I really believe in my music. And I think in a healthy way, when I present something that I think is reflective of, you know, the best of my ability, then I don't care what anyone says about it, because I know that I can't actually do any better. And I've had to do that because I've seen what critics can do to people, and I've seen what people's views can do to musicians, and I've thought it would have to be someone that is so much more developed in all ways that I can consider, that can have a view of my music that can affect me. Like I think that I have confidence in my own ability, and if someone makes a criticism and deep down I really get what they're talking about, and you know, maybe it's the Christmas break, the kind of classic thing. There's Christmas break, you don't play your instrument for 2 months because you're with your family and you're eating, you're drinking, you're having a great time, and then you do that gig in maybe New York for Winter Jazz Fest at the end of January, and you sound like crap because you've not been practicing and you just you don't have it together. Maybe if a reviewer comes and goes, oh well, you know, he sounded like he doesn't have his chops together, I would get that. You know, I would say, you know, I see your point. But if, you know, as an artist, I truly think that I have done the best of my ability, then rejection doesn't mean anything. It's just lessons in terms of what the gap is between the public perception of what my music should be and me. And I think my career has been trying to negotiate those rifts, like what they're kind of trying to find a middle ground between the perception of what I'm supposed to be and how I am in terms of, I change all the time. I try to constantly just do stuff that keeps me energized and just, you know, not inert, whatever the opposite of that is.
And I mean, since you touched on the performing aspect of music, so Charlie Parker once said that music is your own experience, your thoughts and your wisdom. If you don't live it, it won't come out of your horn. That sounds exhausting, isn't it? Can you put your life every time on this bloody horn?
No, it's actually the opposite of exhausting, because what's exhausting is trying to put someone else's life through your horn, you know, which is what a lot of people try to do, especially within the academic circles of music. They try to live someone else's musical experience, and that's so exhausting and demoralizing that it leads a lot of musicians to despair. Whereas if you accept that you can only play who you are, you're not making an effort. It's like, I'm not making an effort to speak to you in a complex way, just the way that things go, you know. It's easy. Like, really, I think that when people realize that being yourself is easier than being someone else, life becomes a lot more straightforward, you know. And articulating who you are, who the person, the self that you think you identify with is, then it becomes a lot more kind of clear.
Shabaka, you're gonna steal my job, man. You're gonna become a psychiatrist. So, and you know, while you're performing, and this is what I find, like to be honest, I find it really difficult. While you're performing, you also need to remember, you know, how to play the bloody song. And Art Farmer, you know, played best, and this is what they say, he played best when he was least conscious of what he was doing. I read a book by Jock Dyer, and he said that, you know, playing became a wild amnesia of technique.
Yeah.
And in my field, so in the field of functional neurological disorders, I have many patients that they cannot walk. And one of the most common remarks that they make is that I have to think, doctor, intensely and concentrate on how to walk, and then I cannot. So how do you balance this fight between the conscious and the unconscious?
Yeah, whenever I've had any musical experiences that I think are transcendental or just what I think is me performing at my best, I'm not conscious. I am playing and it's so intense that I'm either listening to everyone else, I'm just enjoying the vibe, and maybe looking around, thinking about, my mind just goes everywhere. Now, that's the state that I want to get to. What brings me into consciousness are my lack of technique. If there's something that's a problem, it might be a sound issue if the monitors aren't right, or there's some frequencies that are bothering me. If there's something that isn't right, I'm brought into consciousness. If everything is going totally how I know the music, I understand all the forms, then I become unconscious. Now, it's not just a matter of you become unconscious and you hope that you understand the parameters of the music, and this is where practice comes in. So I'll be practicing and rehearsing so that the parameters of the music are second nature, So the parameters of what reality is, that musical reality, I don't have to think about it. I can become unconscious, but I'm just living within that musical realm. I know all the landmarks so much that I don't have to think. It's second nature. If I don't know the music well enough, if I've not rehearsed enough, or I've not practiced enough, I'm brought into reality, and I've got to spend a lot of energy keeping myself in reality, in consciousness. But I don't want to do that. That's why we practice all the time.
And I've seen you perform around 15 times in all sorts of settings. One comment on your playing is I'm still struggling myself to move from a G to a C, but your face. So that face, when you blow that sax, you're not the same. It's as if you break, the time-space continuum and go somewhere else, and then somehow you come back. You take your mouth off the saxophone. It still takes you a few seconds to land back down on earth. And the only time that I can see, let's say I can see Shabaka, the way that I see you now, it's when you break a smile. And there, you're back with all of us. So what the hell is happening in your brain when you perform? So how does it feel?
It feels great. I mean, when everything is flowing, it's an amazing experience because it is a cardio experience. It's not that I'm blowing against a wall. It's not that I'm trying to like bash something. Yeah, it's a flow, and it's like all the years of practicing and finding the right equipment and learning the craft is learning how to create a situation where a lot of energy can get expelled from me, but it can go into something that's reciprocal. So I'm giving out a lot of energy, but the actual equipment can take it, and it's like there's a circular element to what I'm doing. I think just to further answer your question, I don't know, what's going on in my brain is so complicated. It's like throughout the course of one gig, I tell people this, it's like a psychological minefield. Like really, it's like what happens in my head, it changes so much that it can change from, I'm not thinking about anything. Like I try to start the gigs always by clearing everything. So we normally do breathing exercises as a group, or I'll normally do them individually, which is a simple thing of basically breathing as deeply as possible, 30 times, 30 or 40 times, filling your whole body with air. On the last one, you blow out everything, and then you hold your breath as long as you can do it. And then on the last, when you can't hold it anymore, you breathe in and start the whole process, and you do that 3 times. And I find doing that oxygenates myself so much that all the tension and anxiety that I might have been feeling goes away. And I try to keep that zone, keep that attitude. And what I was telling you before about going into public and really keeping my blinkers on, that's what I'm trying to do before I play, not think about anything. And then I get onto stage, I pick my saxophone up, and I try to just be as, dedicated to that instrument as possible. If it needs to be blown really hard, I want to blow it as hard as possible. But in general, it's about the technique, and technique for me is the circular flow. If the technique isn't there, I'll be squeezing too much on the mouthpiece, and the flow won't happen. It's just about having a kind of continuum.
Yeah. I don't know, I find the performance aspect extremely interesting because, being on stage, in a sense, you create, especially in a genre like jazz, where improvisation is a norm, but you're also immersed into the music of others, the band around you. It's a constant bi-directional interaction. I remember when, not that I was there, but Elvin Jones, when he left Coltrane, when Coltrane was going into his more, let's say, experimental phase, he said that, all I could hear was a lot of noise. I didn't have any feelings for the music, and when I don't have feelings, I don't like to play. So that makes me think, so how important are relationships in a band? Because you are in a band, right?
Yeah, it's everything, because we are playing music. The music doesn't live outside of the people. When I play music, I am interacting with individuals that have a specific history and relationship to music, and it's like I enjoy it. It's like my favorite thing in the world to do, to have that connection with people. So, if the relationship with the person, it would be interesting to see what Elvin Jones's relationship with Coltrane was at that point. And I went to a workshop with Elvin Jones when I was about 16 or 17. I was too afraid to play. And this is something that I've always regretted. I had my saxophone and he said, "Does anyone want to jam?" And I was like, "Oh, no." But one thing he said was Coltrane wasn't a big speaker. He'd be in a car with Coltrane for like 5-6 hours and he wouldn't say a single word. He'll just have he'd be looking at the road and not say anything. So I could nearly guess. I really think that it would be that Coltrane hadn't articulated what his ideas or his ideals were. And there was a rift between what Elvin Jones thought of as music and what music should be and what Coltrane thought it should be. And that wasn't articulated. And I found within my own personal experience in music that when that articulation isn't there, that relationship breakdown and the music becomes horrible. Maybe not objectively horrible, and the audience might not appreciate the tension, but to play the music, you have to have some sense of communion with the band members and everyone has to be on the same page. A group like Comets Coming is interesting because we really do function the band in an anarchic way, in that no one tells anyone what to do. No one has ever told anyone what to do. Like there's no governing body. We come into the primary rehearsals to get the first material, and we jam for hours and hours, and then we cut songs from what we've jammed, and then we rehearse the songs that we've cut from the jams, and then we create a set from that. So at no point has anyone ever told me, "Can you do this on the saxophone?" or have anyone told anyone, "Can you do that?" And I might hear at certain points things that I think I would want this to be differently if I was in control. But it's been my relationship with that band has been a progression of letting go, going, maybe if I don't like it, I need to actually let go, and maybe I will like it. Or maybe everyone is actually in the same journey. So maybe everyone's trying to be as proficient and articulate as possible, and it'll become better within the passage of time.
So, Shabaka, we touched on pressure. We touched on finding your own identity. The conscious and the unconscious processes of performing, the expectations that people have from you, the emotional investment, but also the rejection that may come with exposing yourself, difficult relationships, but also the endless worries, including at times financial ones, as being an artist is not, all rock and roll and parties in luxury hotels, is it? So, although these, up to an extent, can be part of anyone's life, they can also be a perfect recipe for a mental breakdown. Now, there is this tendency to link creativity and artists with mental illness. So there was even this, there was this inverted U model where increased severity of symptoms of mental illness resulted in increased creativity, but up to a certain point, and beyond which it started to diminish. Now, for unexplained reasons, people tend to romanticize that link between, artists and mental illness, though I have to say that there's nothing romantic about suffering from a severe mental illness. So what do you think is the link between creativity and mental health?
Well, it depends if you see the society in general as being mentally stable, and I think that we are not within a society as as a whole society that is stable. So maybe what we consider to be mental instability is a drifting away from certain societal norms or traits that certain individuals see, like see without any filters or without the niceties that we're conditioned to adhere to. And creatively, like I was talking, like I keep coming back to that ability to be blinkered, to kind of keep a chain of thoughts, a chain of association. What the society will try to do is to try to get in line. That's, I guess, the nature of society, is people are in line, people are operating as one unit. I think creativity often comes from going outside of the unit, going outside of the necessary frameworks, that society would have you adhere to. And there's a fine line between stepping out of the framework artistically and stepping out of it societally. If you step out of it societally, then you're seen as, as crazy. If you can be an artist and step out of it societally, then people will think you're eccentric and a great artist. As we're seeing, for instance, with Kanye West, who obviously is suffering from mental instability, but because he's an artist, he's not seen as, he's not seen in the same light as, so-called regular people with mental instability. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, the truth is that, obviously there were many studies, but in 2013, there was a massive study in Sweden. So they looked into more than, I think, like 1 million people, and that they found that except for bipolar disorder, individuals in creative professions, don't ask me what they mean by that, they were not really clear about what that means, they were not more likely to suffer from psychiatric disorders than healthy controls. However, being an author, so specifically being an author, a writer, was specifically associated with increased likelihood of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, even suicide.
Oh yeah.
I know it's a really massive topic, and let's move to another even bigger topic. Let's move to drugs. So RJ from Wu-Tang Clan, he once said about cannabis that he used it as an aid to creativity, and that it got him open like fallopian tubes, so some sort of mental fertility. He has his way with words, RGA. So now the majority of musicians that forged the bebop revolution in the 40s and the 50s, so they fell victim to drug addiction. So Sonny Rollins, Miles Davis, Jackie McLean, Coltrane, Art Blakey. So they all use substances with terrible consequences at times.
Yeah.
So are drugs involved in the creative process, or are they a way out of the burden that comes with creativity?
I think everything, it all links up to the same thing. Like if you look specifically at the situation in the 30s and 40s in America, where a lot of jazz musicians were addicted to heroin, you've got to look at the general societal framework that was there, in that a lot of Americans were addicted to heroin. It was a massive problem in the way that opioids are a massive problem now. Heroin only became illegal in the States, I think it was the beginning of the 30s. Before that you could order it in catalogs. There was these adverts where it was a cough syrup medicine. Charlie Parker famously became addicted to morphine when he had a car accident when I think he was 17, and morphine was the best pain relief at the time, or that was the easiest available to him at the time. And then it kept, the habit kept on. Now, what that does to your creativity, what I've heard from musicians that have taken the kind of heroin, is that it allows the reality around you to strip down and for you to focus completely on what is in the present, in a way that all the pains and the tortures of the outside external world don't mean as much to you. There's many things that can do that, many forms of meditation, many forms of breathing exercises, a lot of knowledge that comes from actually Kemetic yogic practices try to get you into that state of, nirvana, if you want to say that. So I don't think it's the drugs per se, but I think, all musicians need to get to a certain point. They need to get to a certain vantage point with them and reality. If drugs are the easiest way, or if drugs are the way that the society that they're in the only way that can be explained to them, then that's what they'll do. If there was a culture of meditation, of breathing, of exercise, of really focusing on getting to that state without the use of drugs, then musicians will do it, because really it's about unlocking chemicals that are in your body already. Like, we've got a pineal gland, it can be released, like and drugs are an easy way of doing it, but it's not the only way of doing it. So I think that what musicians are going for in the drug state is important, but drugs aren't the only way of doing it. And there's always the thing of, we never know if Charlie Parker would have been 10 times more brilliant than he was if he didn't take drugs. And actually, we do know, because he would have. Like Coltrane, when he quit heroin in, I think, 1958, that's when his playing became amazing, became incredible. He became addicted to sweets, however, that not so good. But his playing, from all the musicians that I've looked at that have quit heroin or quit doing hard drugs, their output shoots up. They really, like Sonny Rollins, everyone really goes on a kind of righteous path, and their output becomes amazing.
Now, as we've already alluded to, music is embedded, in every society from the beginning of time. And at times it actually reflects what's happening at that moment in time. So it's really interesting. I was reading that, there is this ethnomusicologist called Alan Lomax. So he suggested that the freer a society is, the larger the intervals in that society's sonic scales. And as societies became stricter and more hierarchical, the notes they used started clumping together. And he accounted actually for the unique sound of the blues by pointing to the way in which the wide interval gaps of the traditional African tribal music, they were made with the blue notes as a response to slaves finding themselves stranded at the bottom of the society. Now, fast forward to 2020, and British jazz is more politicized than ever. So Moses Boyd's latest album, Burning Black Union Flag, Sarah McCartney's last record, Arise, she said that it's a response to the systemic causes of Black Lives Matter and Windrush. Actually, you told The Guardian that you feel a responsibility to create a music that can inspire or energize those protesting in the Black Lives Matter movement. So, in a sense, is your saxophone, for lack of a better word, a weapon of some sorts?
Yeah, I think so, because we're all just trying to do what we can to dismantle this system, and when I say dismantle the system, I'm not talking I'm trying to be as complex as possible without going into it, but I don't see dismantling the system as being necessarily just protesting or just throwing bricks at it. I mean, this is the system that created slavery, that created the capitalist objectification of workforces, that created, objectification in itself. For me, this has to be dismantled, and music can be a way of doing it if you believe it, or trying to create an atmosphere within your music where people can open themselves up to viewing their reality in a different way, and this is, for me, this is where it starts. It has to start with the ability of individuals to dream utopias. It's not just an intellectual thing. It's not just something that other people do and people read about. And for me, that takes creativity. And I know that creativity is sparked from inspiration. So if I can play music that inspires people, then hopefully that inspiration won't just be symmetrical. It'll be, asymmetrical. They'll go into their reality, look at a situation that they maybe have had blind spots before, and some creative spark in their brain can make them see it in a different way. For me, that's the most important, product of music, that people go out into the world and their eyes, I always go back to that fact that your brain only computes like something like 30% of what your eyes technically see. You see You see so much stuff, but you only see what is relevant, or you only process what is relevant to you, or what is relevant to the idea of you that you hold dearly. You know, so for me, music is a process of just reconfiguring the idea of you, you know, and that comes from creativity, you know.
So on one hand, you have Mingus saying, "Don't call me just a second-class citizen," the whole back of the bus. And then you have Martin Luther King giving the opening address to the Berlin Jazz Festival back in the 60s, where he says that jazz articulates the suffering, hopes, and joys of the Black experience. So, jazz, Black music?
Yes and no. Like they're different realities. You know, there's the reality in which a word is taken and it's applied to music as a discriminatory force. So when Mingus says his music isn't jazz, it's because jazz had been called Black music by the American mainstream industry. And because it was seen as Black music, and they are a society that is inherently racist, it meant that there were a lot of blockages to what musicians were seen as being able to do. So even if you go into the academic world, the world of music, colleges and conservatoires, classical music in America, classical music is seen as, is called legit music. You know, as a general, a colloquial term, it's called, you know, and this is something that I was really shocked of when I've had professors come from America. They go, so he was on the legit course, blah, 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 blah. Because jazz is seen as illegitimate music. And the reason it's seen as illegitimate music is because it's seen as Black music, and Black people are seen as less than in America, you know, in terms of as a historical fact. Now, when Mingus says, "I don't want to be referred to as a jazz musician," he's saying, "I don't want to be referred to with the kind of small-mindedness that you hold Black people with." I can't think of the right word. You know, whereas when Martin Luther King talks about jazz, he's referring to the thing itself, the music, the style, the culture itself. But whereas, it's just a different thing. And both people are right. You know, if I'm talking to someone who doesn't know a lot about music, and I know that the idea of the music that I play is gonna be easier expressed if I just say a word, I'll say the word jazz, you know, because it's easy. Whereas if I've got time, or if the person does have some sense of nuance, I'll explain what I mean, and I won't use the word jazz, because, you know, that is the history of jazz, of the word jazz, is a history of the word being imposed on musicians. Duke Ellington famously said he tried to get a string ensemble piece played in Carnegie Hall, and they wouldn't, because they said jazz musicians don't make music like this, you know. And the inference is that, you know, jazz/Black musicians can't make music that's good enough to be of this form in these spaces. So if that's what jazz is, then, you know, I don't want to be a part of jazz. I don't want to be a part of something that's restrictive because of race. Whereas if the meaning of the word jazz is evolved, and the meaning of words evolve all the time, if the meaning evolves to be something bigger, something more universal, then we can talk. But then the problem is, we can't have a situation where jazz evolves to be universal and the particularity of Black Americans' contribution to the music gets erased. That's the kind of dilemma or the paradox within the whole situation.
And I mean, you know, you're true, because, you know, racial discrimination and abuse was, you know, an everyday thing for Black musicians. You know, Art Blakey, Miles Davis, Bud Powell, so all badly beaten by the police. Do you experience racism as a musician nowadays?
Obviously not the same form of racism. Actually, when you say racism, it's one of these terms that is complicated, because I see racism as a system, you know, not as traits. So for me, when a lot of people talk about racism, they talk about the most ugly traits of it. So someone screaming a bad word, someone making an obvious discrimination. Whereas for me, the classical teacher coming in and saying the legit musicians, me knowing the meaning of that word, and the way that the meaning of him calling classical music legit means that jazz music is illegitimate, and what that means in a historical sense, for me, that is racism, as in it's supplementing the system of thought that results in the worst manifestations of racial tensions. In terms of clear racial discrimination, you know, yeah, it comes up because there is in the world, you know, like we've had a band member being beaten up by the police in Sons of Kemet. We'll be stopping at airports, and you know, we'll be the people that get pulled over and searched in the, you know, in the bunch. But for me, those aren't those are the obvious things. Those are the things that make me go, these are simple-minded people that can't let go of their narrow racial definitions. For me, the more important racial issues are the more subtle ones, you know, the ones where it's to do with how people see the hierarchy of people, or the hierarchy of musical forms, or hierarchy.
Well, you know, following this, you know, this impossible to digest murder of George Floyd, you know, back in May, there have been protests, there have been riots, there have been statues went AWOL, politicians condemned racism. However, how can we be open and honest and talk about racism in this country when we still have a caste system that goes by the name monarchy? We have a queen.
Yeah. We can't really, you know. I find, and actually in my day-to-day, I try to not discuss race, especially with white people, you know, paradoxically, as much as possible. You know, I try to listen as possible. With something like this where I can go into depth in explaining, I will. But my issue is actually deeper than the monarchy. Is that most, you know, British people that I have met and conversed with don't know their history, you know. They don't know their history, as, you know, outside of what they've been taught in schools and what their immediate, you know, meeting with their history has been. For me, history is all sides. History, like if I'm talking to you right now, you know, we are in an engagement, and I'll have an idea of what this engagement is. You'll have an idea of what this engagement is. But because I maybe have more followers on Instagram or whatever, if I were to write a description of this engagement, everyone would look at that and go, that is what happened. Whereas that is not what happened. What happened is there were two perspectives. So your perspective is as equal and as valid as mine if we take away the hierarchy of followers. Now, this is what happens in history. You know, there are always two sides to every story. You know, but because Britain is actually the land of the oppressor, if you're looking at Black people, it's that spot. You know, we haven't really. I feel like the British population hasn't really internalized what British history is from the other perspective. You know, from the perspective of those who slaved in the fields, from those who, you know, were colonized. You know, so at that point, and that takes just reading. It takes just getting the books and doing the reading, and then from that point being able to engage in conversations from a point of mutual knowledge. You know, so there aren't going to be any meaningful conversations until people really just understand that there's a lot of work to be done, and the work isn't being done in schools. I saw that there was a petition to actually broaden the school curriculum to include more nuanced investigation into the Britain's colonial past, you know. So at the moment, if that happens, then maybe the next generation can have a decent conversation about the monarchy and about race in general. But at this point, we're just arguing from totally different perspectives. Like Black people are arguing from a lived reality. People who know Black history and the meaning of what we're talking about when we talk about race are talking about something else that is theoretical. And then you've got a population that doesn't, or elements of the population that doesn't live a reality, but also don't know the history. So for me, it makes no sense even engaging in it. You know, that's not that these things don't need engagement. It means that they don't need mutual discourse. It needs for, I think, people like artists or just people in general to share opinions and for people to read different opinions. And it's not one way. It's not like, oh, I have an opinion because I am Black and therefore you read it. And, you know, it's just that I think that, you know, this is one of the things I've tried to do since the whole George Floyd trauma and the whole Black Lives Matter protest moment, is I've tried to read more and to think more, you know. And social media, I feel like it encourages people to just chat more, you know, and to argue more and to, you know, whereas I feel like, you know, we need to step back and we need to all just think and read and get ideas and think about them personally before we go external, you know.
Okay, so let's lighten it up a bit, just a bit. So last month,
Yeah.
Portugal devoted the whole issue to madness, as they chose to call mental illness, depicting actually mental health illness in a, let's say, outdated way. And trust me, many people went berserk, requesting for an apology statement and so on and so forth. And this is just an example of how people can be offended, insulted by creative expression and art.
Yeah.
Lyrics aside, can music be offensive?
Yeah, I think it can, because remember, music is expression. Music, and if you consider that music expression, music is expressing something. It's expressing a viewpoint. It's expressing a worldview. So if as a listener you can actually tap into what's being reflected, you might be offended by it. You know,
wow.
It's very possible that and it's not that the sound itself is offending you. It
Right.
might be the meaning that you're attaching to the sound is offensive to your worldview or to your perspective. You know, there's some music that I hear, you know, sometimes I hear really trite pop music, you know, pop music that I know is made by numbers, that I know is the construction of the elements of the industry that is anti everything that I stand for. And I go back, it's offensive to me, you know, for many reasons. And I might be able to explain the reasons in detail, but, you know, I would say, yeah, so music can be offensive.
So Shabaka, what are you up to these days? Are you writing a new pop anthem?
Yeah, exactly. So mainly, I'm doing two things. I'm finishing a new Sunday Kemet album. We started to record it. I think we started last September, and now was going to be the period that it was going to be mixed. But I was going to be on the road touring, so I was going to have to do the kind of communication about the mixing and production mobilely. Whereas now I'm actually able to go into the studio with David Harris, our mixing engineer, and actually just really get hands-on. And for me, I think it's maybe the best thing I've done. I listen to it every day just for pleasure, even without it being finished. I think it's I really enjoy it. But the other thing is I've got a new iPad, and I really believe that the future in making music is on this piece of equipment. You know, when you really get into, yeah, it's pretty crazy. And actually, Theon Cross from Sunday Kemet, you know, he's like maybe 10 years younger than me, and he was telling me this before, and I was like, yeah, iPad, yeah. And then I started doing some research on it, and actually, technology has really leaped forward in terms of being able to produce high quality music using this piece of, you know, equipment. So at the moment, I'm just watching YouTube tutorials. I wake up and I watch YouTube tutorials, and I try to learn how to do all the stuff, you know, sampling, just producing, basically using that IMP3 Pro 2, going into all the different software packs, and yeah, just geeking out.
Never stops. Man, thank you so much. I mean, you know, wish I could hug you, but you know, blood is streaming between us. Shabaka Hutchings, ladies and gentlemen, just go out there, buy his records, and between me and you, just go and see him play live. It will transform your life. And that wasn't for us. You know, the first season of BRAINCAST just reached the end, as I need to get as far as possible from anything remotely resembling a hospital. I'm flying to Motherland to see my mom and dad, eat as much Greek food as I can fit at least in this compact vessel of mine, and make sure my sister hasn't messed up with my records. A massive thank you to Maudsley Learning, Hannah, Caroline, Dimeji, Sean, Jose, and James, to all the speakers that dedicated their precious time, especially during these bizarre times. But most importantly, to all of you that week after week, you put up with my beautiful Greek accent. BRAINCAST will be back in September, and damn, the schedule looks so good. From psychedelics in the Amazon to tics, impulse control disorders, and that beautiful little molecule called glutamate. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Make August count, stay safe and sane, and listen to more Shabaka. Pospo and BRAINCAST for Maudsley Learning. Over and out.
See you.